Hello and welcome to the 9th edition of Half Hour, a podcast starring me, John Paul Logidisi, as your host. In today's episode, I'll discuss all things Czech Republic with my friend and vice president, student president of UNIP. Good to have you on the show, man. Thanks for coming.
Good to be here. Thank you for inviting me. It was very nice to get the first invitation here back in Czech Republic, if I'm correct, right?
Yeah. And I feel like I had to do that, just because you kind of introduced me to this whole thing. And that was a pretty cool moment, and it kind of taught me a lot,
Introduced you to Czech Republic or podcasting?
Podcasting.
Oh, for real?
Yeah. But I mean, Czech Republic too, in that way.
Mm-hmm.
You're very knowledgeable, and I kind of look up to that. I think that's cool.
Thank you.
But so how's the recent life been treating you? How's work? What do you do for work?
Currently, actually, because that's an interesting thing, you mentioned we're going to talk about Czech Republic. Where I work right now it's like a part-time job. It's just very, very, short. I go there for 4.5 hours, so much, which I think it's perfect for studying because you can combine it with your classes. And I work in a company which is called Bohema. And Bohema is a company that is very Czech-based. It's based on Czech history, Czech personalities. And what they do is they have T-shirts, they have posters, which I want to, also put in the student lounge, that are all themed like Czech Republic. So they have, if anybody knows, maybe Kafka, Čapek, Havel, all the famous personalities. You can wear T-shirts of them. So I think that that is a pretty cool concept, and I wanted to join that. So that's what I've been doing quite recently. It's working for that company or for that brand, and I've been doing some videos on TikTok recently, actually, also about Czech Republic. I try to introduce the Czech history to young audience because I think that is very important.
Yeah, well, it's super important. I can't underestimate the value of history. I mean, I as an American, I love American history. It's not very long. It's pretty new. But I think history in general is so fascinating, whether you're studying the ancient Mesopotamia civilizations and the ancient Indus River Valley and the Yangtze and Yellow River civilizations. It's fascinating, really. You guys have so much history over here, and I feel like that's something to be noted. I mean, a lot of my viewers are American, I would assume. So just tell us more about Czech Republic. A big question that I get asked is, what language do you speak? Now, I always say they speak Czech. Yeah. Come on, guys. However, I think the question is more about what does it sound like, or what is it what is it derived from? So everyone knows, for example, that Spanish and Italian and French are similar. But in America,
family of languages. Yeah,
we get the view that Italian and French are kind of brother languages to Spanish. So I know that Czech has a similar relationship with other languages.
Yeah. Všechny vás zdravím, moje jméno je Petr Jirsa a jsem z České republiky a mluvím právě česky. Well, that was in Czech, basically introducing myself and saying that I'm speaking in Czech. The language is, of course, Czech, but the family is a Slavic language. So if you compared Polish, if you compared the Slovakian language is very similar. Russian would be similar. Ukrainian is pretty close as well. So these are languages which are all categorized as Slavic languages. Even if you visited the Balkans, you would go to Croatia, you go to Serbia, these countries would have similar languages because they come from a similar background. This language, I mean, probably Russian could be familiar for some of you. So it sounds like that, and the language in itself, I think it's very difficult to master, even for myself. Yeah. We've been to a pub right now, and you wanted to say potato soup, which is bramborová polévka, but you said bramborový polévka.
Yeah.
And our language is difficult in this because we have very different endings of words, but
it always conjugates differently.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it's so. It's such a unique opportunity, in my case especially, just because I get to come out here and see and learn all of the different styles and vernacular. I had a class with this girl from Poland over the summer, And I asked her, I go, how is it similar to Czech? And I think she said like either her language or your language, the way that the words are said, it's like cuter, or that was the word she used, but she didn't.
Yeah.
There's not really, as someone who speaks one language, and it's just hard to wrap my head around how a language can sound cute, or just.
That's what I would think of Slovakian language, for example. I'm sorry to my Slovak friends and Slovak viewers, but because our languages are similar, but in the same time quite different, the pronunciation is very different, pronunciation-wise. I know I talked to a Polish girl, and we tried to speak together in our own languages, and how much would we understand each other. So I spoke to her purely in Czech, and she would speak to me purely in Polish.
Did you get most of it?
Most of it, but there are the things like you need to really use your brain for that because it doesn't sound like natural for you. But because we can see that the languages are realistically similar, we can really hear the difference. You must think of it something like a very different, very very different accent. You hear maybe somebody speaking maybe from Nigeria, speaking Nigerian English. Maybe that would sound super strange for you, but you could understand a couple of words. That would be probably how I would compare it.
It's kind of like how I took a trip to Scotland, and the bus driver was saying some things, and I just couldn't. I was having a very hard time with that. But it's just so fascinating that Europe has this definitely with the multitude and kind of richness of languages.
Wait, Is everybody? Everybody, the same guy that was calling you just called me. We are in high demand, I would say.
Well, you got the president and the vice president sitting
here. Yeah, true. Here,
top cabinet.
Here at the university, by the way. Yeah.
Red unit,
The poster on the back needs to be removed. It's
New York. I'm from Boston.
Nothing against that, but.
Well, not for you, but
Never been to New York.
Boston, New York. Anyone who's from the region knows it's no good.
That is so strange for me,
city rivalries kind of.
City rival, we have that too, but it's such a different level because you can see people are behaving in such a different way around the US. So for us, we think of like similarities in one country. So for us to understand the US as a very very, multi sort of. The combination of very different people is hard to understand. When I was a child, I would never think that the U.S. would be different on the West Coast and the East Coast.
Yeah, so you're kind of thinking it's more or less all the same. Like at that
when I was
time.
younger, I thought that way.
Yeah.
Maybe.
I mean, I can forgive you for that. It's not unreasonable. I can say that people from Boston are more similar to people in the state of New York.
Yeah.
Than similar to people in South Carolina. Like I would say that there's way more cultural differences between me as someone from the north. You look at someone from the south, like South Carolina, Georgia. You go down to Mississippi, Alabama. Different. It's a different place. It definitely. I would use the word provincial. A bit more rural. I guess those are words I would use. But going back to the Czech Republic, I don't want to get too off guard here, but. Something that fascinates me is that, Czech and Slovak are very similar languages. They're very much the same, but both of these countries found themselves under the control of the Habsburgs for 1,000 years, right?
It was the longest rule here.
Do you think that the Germanic and I would argue some Hungarian influence, just a little bit.
Yeah, Slovaks don't like to hear that, but that's true.
I know they don't, and I've had this conversation with them.
Yeah.
But my in a non-offensive way, my question is just: do you think that those two cultures had an effect on the languages? Do you think that's why Czech is dissimilar from Polish? Do you think it was from the centuries of German and other influence?
I think it had an influence for sure, but not to an extent maybe you would think. We have words which are German, but maybe they were more spoken by people in in the past. People they didn't speak Czech. The Czech people often didn't speak Czech at all. The main language was German. You had the most famous Czech writers. Well, okay, defining what is Czech in 1,000 years back is difficult because it's like a nation which didn't really like exist back then. We may take it more as like it's in the area where Czech Republic currently is, right? So they lived there, and they always just spoke in German. They wrote in German, and Czech was more like the very rural language, more like a national. Only few could speak and master. And then there was a movement where they tried to promote this. So they created the language, or they revived the language.
Was this in like the 1800s, maybe? Or?
Yes. I would say more like towards the second half of 1800s, 1900s per se.
That was when the nationalism model
Yeah.
was kind of taking hold
Yeah.
across Europe after Napoleon.
Yeah, it's like a national revival. You basically have a country which had like, it was a Bohemia, it had a history, but then was sort of Germanized, and then you had personalities trying to revive that, and it was efficient and it worked.
So my understanding is that German was like the language of government.
It was the main language.
The
yes.
language of power, if you will, because back then it was
Yes.
there was a lot of subjugation going on. I know that this happened in a lot of places. Sometimes it was in countries where the minority group, or the group that's actually smaller in size, had more control. Like I know that in Belgium, the French-speaking Walloon region had more power over the kind of trajectory of the country than the Dutch-speaking North. There was a lot of discrimination there too. So it's like,
or you could take it like more as a example of Russian-speaking countries where the local national languages are kind of dying out. I could be wrong here, but in Azerbaijan, the Russian language is like the main spoken language, but you have Azerbaijani language. But it's not as strong because it's not language, or maybe it's not practical for them to use it, because all the business, everything is in Russian. So take it like that. Everything is in German, and the Czech was like kind of dying out, but then we revived it. But of course, some words are still very Germanized. They sometimes use like, my parents used portemonnaie, or it was like for, what you put money in. Something like that. They would use it. It was like a German word. But as of now, I wouldn't say that the German influence is visible.
Yeah, I mean, so many years have gone by, and the legacy of the world wars and
Yes.
Things like that. One thing that is pretty fascinating to me is like I do some hiking. I've done some hiking here in the Czech Republic. I've gone to what do I call the land between Germany and Czech Republic? Because I know they used to call it the Sudetenland, but is that not the name you'd use anymore? Like what?
I would still use it.
Okay.
Because I would, because it's hard to use it somehow differently, right? Because
it's like the only name for that region. Like if you were to draw it out,
you can call these regions separately. All these regions have their own Czech names, and you call that region in the way it is called. But if you want to call all the regions around, which were Germanized, there's very strong Germans. We had our country, and it's a small country. We have about 10.5 million people. Back then, we had 3 million Germans. It's a massive portion of the population.
Yeah,
back then, the
big.
Czech population was even smaller. So I would still call this area like Sudetenland, because, well, I wouldn't say I'm going to Sudetenland, but I know some of the people that lived still there still refer to it that way. Even our teacher who lives there, I'm not going to mention the name, but he says that he lives in Sudetenland.
Yeah, because I've done some hiking in the Kirkonoše.
Kirkonoše, yes.
That range. I've done some near. I don't know if you know Božidar.
Oh, that's the coldest place.
Is it really?
Yeah.
Klinovec was the mountain name.
Klinovec, yes.
Yeah,
it's like the northern regions, yes.
Mm-hmm. Like they call it the Ore Mountains, or
Yeah.
the Iron Ore. I don't know. Maybe it's just the Ore Mountains, but I know that like that. I'm referring to it more as a geographical feature in the sense that there's mountains all in that region.
Yeah.
So
you can call it like the border region.
Okay.
You could call it that way. But of course, if you talk about it with more also history in mind, you could refer to more as Sudetenland, because it was like the region around the borders where it was mostly Germans living in there.
Yeah, and to me, it's just fascinating how a lot of people take for granted like how in a lot of countries, especially in Europe, it's not just one group of people that live there. You'd think that, or I know a lot of people would think that, okay, so like the only people in Czech Republic are Czechs, but that just isn't the case. Back then, especially, you had more Germans.
Yeah.
But I think the history is so fascinating. I mean, I can tell that just the multitude of castles here.
There's plenty of them. Even churches as well, even though we're very atheist.
Right, and that again, like I've gotten a lot of questions at home from studying here, like, some people who know a little bit more about the region, they'll be like, there's so many churches in Czech Republic, but I hear that they're very atheist, and I go, yeah, and that was part of like the recent history, right? Like I don't. This is where I'm not so fluent. Like I know that there's a lot of churches here. I know that it's very atheist, but some of the causes I'm a little bit in the dark.
The causes of that, nobody. I would say I don't know it for certain. I don't know all the causes. There's a combination of things. The one thing is like that in Europe. Especially in the Central Europe and northern, like the Nordic countries like Sweden,
I know
Norway,
Estonia,
you would already see a sort of wave of atheism. One part of that, of course, is the socialist regime we had here for about 50 years, 40 years maybe, 50 years nearly. And of course that influenced that because this regime didn't really support religion in itself. But I also think it's sometimes the progressive mindset. Sometimes it makes you focus more on technology and explaining things through science. There was in Czech Republic, especially all the way back then. Was a very, very strong scientific influence.
Very industrial too.
Very, very industrial as well. People in these industries often understood things very differently. I would say there was and that was a massive problem. There was there was backlashes with the church. So the Catholic Church was losing a lot of power around Europe because people were realizing that it is very corrupt. It was very corrupt. It was just going for money. And people are just looking for us all the time. I'm sorry for that. I'm just gonna.
Important day, important business.
Yeah.
But kind of like, before I lose the thought.
Yeah.
Like I'm kind of glad that happened because I was just really thinking about it. I went to the observatory a few times here. Tomáš Masaryk.
Tomáš Masaryk, yeah, the first Czechoslovak president.
Yeah, I think that observatory is either named after. I know it's a Stefanik Observatory.
Stefanik, yeah, it's a Slovakian.
I know that. Now I'm thinking. Stefanik. Yeah, he was like I remember reading about it. He was like a soldier, but I think he was an astronomer too, and I think that's why it's there. But I could be wrong. I'm not sure. But I know. There's something with Masaryk up there too. I'm trying to think what it was. I'm sorry, I was totally.
It's fine.
But very scientific. Like that was just a piece of that I thought about.
There was like if you look at that, we had if anybody's interested in this area, like we had here operating, for example, Johannes Kepler. There's a very famous name in.
My buddy's gonna love this part because he loves Kepler. He loves Tycho Brahe.
Tycho de Brahe. All these.
His grave is here.
All of these have worked in Prague. All of these were like sent here, I think by the king. I will not tell you the name right now, but we had a king or like a monarch who was who was a big fan of this. So he invited all of them to work here and to create their theories and observe. So we had very strong influence of that as well. So that could also add up to that. So the combination of all of these things, the socialist regime, the strong scientific background, the industrialism they're here, the failure of the church, that added. We had a strong movements around here that were against the Catholic Church. You could mention even the Hussite movement was like a soldiers.
I was going to say there was a lot of church combat back then.
Combat. So the combination of that just adding to the things of how this country is one of the most atheist countries in the world.
I know that. I'm trying to think right now. I had a great thought. I don't even.
You
know
had a
where
great thought. You lost it now.
Yeah, it had something to do with how that was kind of like the perfect storm, if you will, to kind of, shuffle that off to the side. I was thinking about how, I got it now. The Charles Bridge. I read about a battle where the Swedish took over the Prague Castle.
True.
And they tried to cross the river over the bridge, but neither side had heavy armaments, so they didn't want to blow the bridge up. And they were like trying to fight across the bridge over and over and over again, but the Swedish couldn't break through the lines. I don't know if it was Austrians, but I know the Czechs were involved, obviously, because it's their city.
Yeah.
But I just thought it was fascinating that this battle happened right at the end of the 30 Years' War. As the peace treaty was being signed, they were still fighting and taking things because they were like, oh, it's the last hurrah, if you will, or the war is going to be over. So they plundered the castle. I'm pretty sure they took a lot of stuff out.
Oh, it's true, and they took it and they sometimes have it in their museums. So
yeah, they still got it over there.
Yeah. Well, it's fine. We don't care about that,
Yeah, and it's history is bloody and it's filled with just awful moments.
I would say in terms of history, Prague and Czech Republic was very lucky.
Yeah, you guys have a lot of history here.
No, but also in the sense that I would say similar to the U.S., you were lucky that your geography helped you a lot. That you survived many of the conflicts without your country being affected by that.
Yeah.
Not destroyed cities, nothing like that. Maybe the economy sometimes suffered.
Yeah.
But that's all. Here, you can think geography didn't help us at all. We're in the middle of Europe. When you go to the 20th century, we are surrounded by, Germany. The First and Second World War was, kind of happening here.
Yeah, enough said there. It's...
We're close to Russia. We had an influence from Russia. France, was a very strong country back then. But you also have the influences from the north, from the south. Back then, Mongolians, everything, they were coming through here, Austria. And we are extremely lucky that you couldn't say there was a conflict of such a big altitude. Like, it wouldn't be so big that would destroy the cities. Like, Prague is preserved really well.
Yeah, I was going to say that in the First World War, geographically, there was no air combat.
Yeah.
But now I'm saying geographically, like, what does that have to do with the air? But geographically, I'm saying, like, if you looked at the front lines of World War I, Prague was never there. Czech Republic was never on the front lines. Not Slovakia, because the Austrians did pretty good at not getting invaded, or the Habsburgs. Yeah. They didn't get invaded. I mean, the Russians took over some cities in the east. And
there were some conflicts, but nothing.
Yeah, like they didn't penetrate into to the heartland of that region.
No bombing of the cities, something that Germany or the UK went through.
Yeah,
nothing like that.
In World War II, I watched again like one of those front lines videos, and I think in May of 1945, most of Germany, as you see it today, was taken.
Yeah.
But Austria and the Czech Republic were still not necessarily liberated. Like they were just that when the armies gave up. That the lands that they controlled, like I think Czech Republic and Austria were in there, but they when they gave up, it was just like,
it's true.
It was over. So there was no combat. Like Prague was preserved.
Yeah, there were some combats in the end of Second World War. That's true. Even the last shot of the World War II was in Czech Republic.
Was it really?
Yeah, there was just some minor conflict between the Germans, I think, and the locals. But outside of that, it was all good. Like we had some conflict in Prague, but that was done by the locals.
The resistance movement.
Like resistance movement, which helped pave the way for the Soviet soldiers to come in and save the city. The American soldiers, they came in as well, but they came into Pilsen, and there was the line, which they agreed with the Soviet Union that the Americans will not go over this line. So they kind of stopped their army over there. And then they led the Soviets to liberate the rest of the country. It was the Second World War, to liberate the rest of the country. Interesting fact, the Americans realistically could have gotten to Prague way quicker than the Soviets. But they had a deal with them to separate that. With that being said, even today, a lot of people remind that the Soviets or the Russians saved the country from the Germans.
Yeah.
I would say that it was more of a political background, so we don't want to talk about that.
It was power struggle.
Power struggle, but Americans also were partially liberating Czech Republic.
Yeah, when I took a trip 2 years ago to Pilsen with UNIP, actually, we did like a little welcome trip there on my first orientation. There was a Thank You America monument. It's just like some small monument in Pilsen. I thought that was interesting because I actually had no clue that we even entered the Czech Republic at all in terms of like armies. But
I think you entered the Czech Republic first as well, so
it would have been great if things turned out differently. You know, I genuinely feel like World War II is so complex because you have the U.S., right? We were funding the Soviet Union. We gave them more trucks, guns, and army like outfits than I think they had at the time. Like if you ask me, I think that if we didn't help give them all this equipment, that the war would have turned out a little bit differently. I don't know if the Soviets could have pushed them back. I don't know. I mean, I had a teacher that was always like, "You never invade Russia. Russia always wins." But
it's hard to invade.
Yeah, like I just do feel like without our support, they would have had a very hard time. And then you have the history of the Cold War after that. So it was World War II. Honestly, was kind of a proxy in some ways in that specific fashion because we gave them all this equipment to fight the Germans before we landed in D-Day in France, and we were in Italy a little bit before that too. But yeah, you guys have an excellent history here. I would say your geography does protect you a little bit. I mean, you have these mountains all around you.
It does. Historically, it's cool. It does. Yeah.
I love at the airport. One time before I left to go home, I was looking out the windows and I could see how the mountains just circle. You know?
I mean, the mountains are not high, but I think they're beautiful. They're well preserved. We have national parks there, and it's just nice to see. You go to the mountains and then you can like literally see the other countries. You see the bordering countries. So realistically, you could say that the center is in Prague. Around you have more like the where a lot of people live, and in the borders you have sometimes cities which were more industrial, but also you have the parks. The country is very interestingly separated in that sense.
So if you could leave us with like a saying or what's a good saying in your native language? Like what's a good like phrase, something that's fun?
Our sayings are often similar to your sayings. So I could say dvakrát měř, jednou řež. It's hard to pronounce. That's maybe when it's interesting, and it's just measure twice and cut once. It's always better to measure more times and then do the action just once, because if you
like double checking.
It's always good to do that. Exactly, double check before you do something. Dvakrát měř, jednou řež.
It's good. I mean, it's just like I think that one thing that's very underrated here, you guys don't give yourself enough credit for, is just the multitude of languages that are present. Like, I would say more so in Prague, just because it's a more international place.
True. Strong Russian background as well.
You told me that the Soviets built the metro system.
They did, yes.
When was that? In the 70s?
I would say it's 70s towards 80s. It was like an effort to make the Czechs kind of happy. That's why we were the third country in space, by the way. Interesting. Czechoslovakia was the third country in space.
Was it really?
Yeah. You go to USA, Soviet Union, and then was Czechoslovakia, because
they launched on a Soviet rocket.
Yes. It was a guy called Remek. Okay. And, I hope I'm not mistaken here, right? We'll double check after this, but I think we were the third country in space. That was also like a thing of like, the Soviets wanted to make the Czechs happy because the satellite countries, we were not part of the Soviet Union, by the way. We were like a satellite country. So just under the influence. And we were kind of started to revolt, and then you just do some things which will make the people feel that they're more important.
Yeah, it was like a political move.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's smart in that way.
He worked for some time, for sure, yeah. But also like the Russians, the strong communities, also they come to here, the Ukrainians as well, or, even before the conflict. But also in the 90s, by the way, if anybody's interested about Czech Republic, research the 90s. The 90s were, the crazy era where the police didn't work. The system was new. and the mafia we hear was very strong. One of the most interesting times ever, and there was a very strong Russian mafia here, so that's also why maybe some of the influences here. Try to research that. It's super cool.
Yeah, and
many murders.
Those two things you just told me, I had no clue about. I didn't
Yeah.
know there was a strong Czech mob presence
Very
in that time.
Oh, there was one of there's so many movies about it, so many documentaries about it. The 90s is like called like the wild 90s, like a time where you go from a very strict regime to a very liberal regime in a way that you don't know how to do the regime, and
Yeah,
so
and
many
that-
money was lost.
That can,
Everything was you could do everything. Everything was allowed. That was a crazy time.
yeah, and it can really, like, I can see how when you liberalize very quickly,
Yes.
it can
Too
have this
quickly.
effect. Yeah. But we're definitely gonna have to look at the third country in space thing, because I watched a documentary that said it was China, but let's look at it.
Let's
because-
look at it. Yeah.
Like I think it's actually fascinating. Like,
It might be
is
a Czech
interesting.
propaganda, by the way. You're just like making us feel that we're the third. It might be mistaken, it might be false, but we'll check
You
it.
guys have definitely had someone on the ISS, I would assume, right? The International Space Station, maybe.
We'll check.
Yeah, we're gonna have to look. It's
We'll check.
fascinating. But hey, thank you for coming on the show. I appreciate it.
Thank you, man.
We'll have you on again next time, definitely.
Thank you. I really appreciate you inviting me, and I appreciate you all watching this. And I hope we'll see each other soon. And
Yep.
maybe share UNIP if you're from UNIP or from the US. Hi.
All right. Nasledano.
Nashledanou, or that's too formal. Let's say just ciao.
Ciao. Ciao. See you guys next time.
See ya.